Chapter 2. Evolution of Buildings. Introduction. Shelter, a basic physical human need, has been satisfied in the form of natural habitations, such as caves and treetops, from where he could hunt for animals in the thick forests. Constructed habitations thereafter emerged, such as dugouts, huts of varying shapes, bamboo, palm frond and wood houses, igloos, a small round shelter built from blocks of hard snow, and tents, such as wigwams or tepees, cone-shaped tents. Shelter was of primary importance to the early man, just as it is to the modern man of our time, to protect him from harsh weather, animal predators and marauders. In other words, every form of shelter is expected to act as barriers and as responsive filters between the natural environment and the variety of environment required for human activities. The early man made his shelter using familiar and locally available materials and technology. He made use of natural materials such as mud, leaves, snow, stones and any such material his immediate environment can afford. The form of construction man would adopt for his shelter had always been dictated mainly by prevailing geoclimatic conditions and his socio-cultural beliefs. Today, the concept of building has changed from caves and mere shelter to houses, offices, public buildings, factories, etc. Skyscrapers are now being built more easily consequent upon a greater understanding of the behavior of construction materials and techniques. The modern-day building is more than mere shelter. A form of shelter plus all the necessary services such as water, sanitary facilities and lighting, among others, make up a building. Such a building effectively acting as shelter and with all the necessary hardware, especially building fabric and the building services functioning, is said to fulfill its functional purpose. Other purposes of a building could be classified as social, symbolic and artistic. A building may be constructed to fulfill more than one purpose. The historical perspective. Old centers of civilization like the Babylonians, the Egyptians, Greek, Assyrians, the Romans, etc. built houses, temples, mountains, pyramids, bridges, fortifications, etc. Some of the styles of their construction had their origin in nature itself. For examples, to the Greeks then, man is a measure of all things. Hence the buildings or other structures must be proportionate to man, and their appearance must arouse cheerfulness and respect to people and those look at them. The construction of the Egyptians' posts and lintels were inspired by the lotus, the papyrus, and the palm which were found growing beside the Nile River. The main material used by the Egyptians and Greeks in constructing their temples was stone. They employed beams, or lintels, and columns, posts, as the main structural elements that carry the loads. Stone has been one of man's earliest natural building materials. It is an excellent material for resisting compression. The Egyptian temples and palaces were the first buildings to use post and lintels construction. The pyramids of Egypt were built with cut stones. The pyramids were built as sepulchre of a dead pharaoh. A good example are those at Giza, of which the largest, the Great Pyramid of Cheops, built between 2560–2475 BC, is about 147 meters high. This is the height of modern 45-story residential building. At the base, the sides are about 233 meters long. Cut stones of large sizes, some of which weigh more than 100 tons, have been used by the Incas to build temple, palace and fortress walls, floors and roads in Cuzco, Peru, more than 600 years ago, many of which still stand today. These structures remain monuments to building and engineering. Despite these achievements, the Egyptian builders do not fully understand the structural potential of stone. Since stone is weak in tension, it is therefore a poor material for making beams. To avoid formation of cracks on the tension side and long-span lintel stones at roof level, the beams were made relatively short, up to 25 feet, with the columns placed at relatively close centers. The Romans used cast concrete, usually faced with brick, mainly as their building material. Prominent in their construction is the use of large-sized arches resting on massive abutments, as support of an arch or bridge, which usually resists a horizontal force from an arch, as well as its weight. An arch is primarily stressed in compression. Stone, being a good compression material, thus represents an ideal marriage of form and material. The Romans used arches to build bridges, aqueducts, channels for supplying water by gravity from the surrounding hills to Rome, vaulted roofs, domes and public baths. The Pantheon was topped by a dome spanning 142 feet. Between AD 500 and AD 1500, called the Dark or Middle Ages, there was a general decline in innovative building activities. Stone arches were still widely used then as the major building and structural material. However, a class of buildings of interest in this era are the Gothic cathedrals. Arched roofs of these cathedrals were supported on tall, thin walls whose surfaces contained large window openings and were braced by inclined members called flying buttresses. Another period in history called the Renaissance witnessed the birth of a major element or component of a building, the truss. It was believed that an Italian architect, Palladio, introduced the use of the truss. The trusses were built using timber, though wood had long been used before then. The history of development of wood as a building material goes back to the prehistoric times. 3 factors have contributed to the development of building technology using timber: development of tools for cutting and shaping, methods of connection of cut pieces, and development of structural forms of bridging spans or enclosing spaces. From the Stone Age to the 18th century, timber was primarily the structural material for building shell houses. The Stone Age witnessed the birth of flints and stone axes, which for the first time enable man to separate wood fibers transversely and longitudinally. Then small circular huts and long ridgepole huts could be built. There was an improvement of the cutting tools and techniques, with the ushering in of the Bronze and Iron Age, when man discovered how to separate metals from rocks and to melt them. The emergence of iron saws enabled more complex timber frames, such as the crack frame, log cabin construction, to be developed. Later engines to drive the cutting edges invented, and larger-sized wood components could be cut, connected and fixed. The use of metal tools has extended beyond using them as mere weapons and cutting tools. They are now being used as roof coverings. Building as a communal activity. In early times, building was a communal activity. Then there were 2 professional builders. All the members of a family would come together to construct a family house. The construction of civic buildings such as town halls, palaces, fortresses, was the responsibility of either every member or selected members of the community. In the course of participating in many building projects, certain individuals soon acquire special skills which set them apart from their fellow men. The recognition of such skills by members of the community led to these individuals being hired as professional builders. The first professional builder of recorded history was Imhotep, the Grand Vizier to King Zoser of Egypt, who built the stepped pyramid at Saqqara, Egypt, about 2750 BC. Ever since, more and more individuals have turned professional, being masters in the trade, constituting themselves into a guild during the Middle Ages. The main purpose of the guilds was to protect ingenious artisanship. They regulated the trade with respect to issues such as apprenticeship, wages and prices. During this period of the emergence of the guilds, the professional builder was so prominent at that time that Hammurabi even had codes for the builder way back in 2200 BC. This oldest building code, Code of Hammurabi, 2200 BC, p83, clearly identifies the builder as a person directly responsible to the owner. Similarly, in modern times, the professional builder is the only professional in the building industry to say that he is responsible for the fate of the building he has put up. The Industrial Revolution. The early Industrial Revolution of the 19th century brought about radical changes in the building construction profession by introducing new materials, e.g. steel and cement, as well as various developments in multiple-story designs and construction, which was aided with the invention of the hoist brake by Otis. These developments brought in its wake the emergence of professionals who turned the master builder to a building professional.